Hi, welcome to episode 48 of Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro. I'm Ian Glacken. I'm an executive consultant with Snowden Optiro based here in Perth, Western Australia. Today I'm with Rayleen Hargreaves, who is a principal consultant, and she's also the Reconcilor product owner at Snowden Optiro. Rayleen's a geologist with many years of experience both in operations geology, mine geology, and consulting. Rayleen's in charge of guiding, developing and managing the Reconcilor product, which is Snowden Optiro's enterprise reconciliation solution. Rayleen's had exposure and involvement with reconciliation across many operations. Today, we're going to talk about data transparency across the mine value chain and how it contributes to good reconciliation. Hi, Rayleen.
Hi, Ian. Good to be here.
For our viewers and our listeners, how would you define data transparency? And why do you think it's important in the mining industry?
Oh, I think first of all, I would like to define what I consider mine reconciliation before I go any further. There's been a few conversations over recent months as to the difference between mine reconciliation and metal reconciliation. So just to be clear, when I'm talking mine reconciliation, I'm talking about the differences between planned and actual numbers. So measured numbers, whether they be planned numbers, whether they be estimates, and then the measured numbers, whether they be the plant production numbers. So it's really important to be able to do mine reconciliation so that you can look for ways to improve variation between different parts of the mine value chain. So different parts being maybe the estimates in your model, your trucking, your stockpile inventory, all the way through to your plant and perhaps port. If you cannot measure how well you are performing against what you planned to perform, then I do question why you're even there. There's confidence around the numbers that you're presenting that you're going to be mining. So it's very important that you be able to measure how well you're actually mining that as well. Little bugbear of mine. So I thought I'd just get that out of the way. But in regards to data transparency, it's really critical for understanding the performance of the mine so that you can identify that the improvements that can be made. So I've just already mentioned that. We talk about variances. It's very important to be able to reduce that variance over time. Good data transparency is very important for mine reconciliation. And why is that? And so that people can actually see how you're doing those comparisons. It's making sure there are no fudge factors in the way that you're calculating your results. It's making sure that you've got solid data sources to be able to provide the data that's feeding into that reconciliation reporting. It's understanding the methods that you're using for reconciliation or for collating that data as well. And knowing what the key assumptions are before you actually start to do that comparison. So really important that that data is accurate, it's complete, it's available in a timely instance. We don't want to be waiting a month to get results back so that we can do the reconciliation. It's very important that we actually can get that information quickly. But more than that, I think it's really important to be able to present that data in a way that's easy to understand and interpret. And, we've both been talking about Harry Parker's F1, F2, F3 factors. That's just the start. That's just some standardization around reconciliation that you can actually understand. And again, a bit of transparency around the actual numbers that are creating those factors is really important. Two big reasons I think that it's really important, though, is that stakeholders, so shareholders, have invested in a company because there is a resource model in the ground that can be mined. You've said it can be mined. We've got a budget. We're showing what we're going to be mining. So it's confidence from those, it's giving confidence back to those shareholders. But it's also giving them trust as well. So trusting that you can actually do a responsible job at mining the resource that's in the ground. And I'm talking about trust as in environmental trust there, sustainability, all of that ESG. It all does come down into how well you're mining that resource.
So that's a good explanation. So you've talked about data. What types of data are we typically collecting along the mine value chain?
Yeah, so as part of our Reconcilor implementations, it's really important that we understand what data people are actually capturing on site. And so whether that be a resource model, a reserve model, it can be a version of a resource model, it can be grade control models or control models. Basically, whatever models you're capturing, it's really important to be going back and actually measuring how well those models are performing. And then, of course, we have mine plans. We're looking for planning compliance around different types of mine plans. And then we start to move into the mining, so the dispatch movements, and then survey. So how well have you actually, mined what you said you were going to mine according to survey? Stockpile management, always a big one. Definitely important to have a real good grasp on your stockpiles, what you've got sitting on there, what's going to be sent to the plant, and giving the plant confidence that it will get what you've said it's going to get. So, and that comes down to understanding what you've got sitting on your stockpile, so your inventory, but the material types, the lithology types, which have a huge impact, and certain grades have a huge impact through the actual plant. Yeah, so that's, to me, and then of course you got your weightometers and your samplers through the plant. So it's actually just getting those key points and actually knowing what they are, and perhaps even having a map, a flow chart to show what they are and where that data that feeds that information is coming from, and again just making it transparent, standardizing it, and letting everybody on site know that this is our mine value chain, this is the material movement flow, and this is where the data comes from and goes to.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about the types of data, and we talked about the need to have transparency across the entire chain. But what are the challenges? And there are many, of course, but what are the challenges that some companies find with achieving this level of data transparency?
Okay. Obviously, we've got resourcing challenges these days. I think it probably hasn't changed much over the years. There always seems to be that boom and bust in mining, where we've got too many geologists and we don't have enough geologists and other resources as well. So I think you've got a resources challenge. So keeping people on site or within the company that know how your reconciliation, how your data was collected from previous months. But of course, we've got the complexity of the mining process itself. So, I wish it could all be so simple, and we've got a hole in the ground, you dig it and put it straight to the crusher, and we don't have stockpiling. So it's just understanding the complexity of the actual mining environment itself. These days, it's the large amounts of data that's being generated as well. So, we can put measuring stations everywhere, and we can collect as much data as we possibly can, down to the second we can collect data, but it's actually being able to manage that data and do something with it. What's the point of collecting it if you can't actually do something with that data? Along with that, though, you've got the need to protect the confidential information. So, we've got, AI, and we've got cloud, and we've got that, but we've still got that confidential aspect to the data that we're collecting, and of course the way that we're generating those reports, until we're actually ready to go public with the results. But I think another challenge that we see, and I've already touched on it, and it is standardizing the data across the different mining operations, the regions, and the jurisdictions. So we've got some large companies. It's actually making sure that there's a standardized approach to reconciliation, whether it be gold, platinum, coal, whatever it may be, and actually being able to generate those reports and collect that data.
Yes, and indeed, we've got two of the world's largest mining companies just outside our window here. So if you were in charge of upgrading or designing a reconciliation system, how can you ensure that your data or your system is transparent and accurate?
We do look at companies that don't actually need a reconciler. Okay, so this is definitely more from a reconciliation holistic perspective. I think we need to be looking at standardizing your data management systems for the first thing. So making sure that you've actually got some standards around the way that you're collecting that data. Making sure that there's checks and balances on the data that's being collected. So there's no point in collecting data if it's invalid, or if it doesn't roll up to feed into reports in the same way as another data source does. It's implementing data quality controls around your data. So again, it's just all about that quality of data, having confidence that the data that you're going to start to analyze and report on is of good quality. And I think ultimately it does come down to just training of staff. So rather than just saying to somebody, there's our reconciliation report, away you go, there should be a standardized process around the way that people are doing reconciliation, the way that the company is collating their data for their reconciliation reporting. So I think it's whether it be training the staff in data management, in the transparency, or reconciliation itself. I think they are three big areas that we shouldn't forget. That the investment in people is still so important.
Yeah. So let's suppose we've been through this process, we've been through the study, we've achieved data transparency. What do you think are the benefits to firstly to the industry, but also to individual mining companies?
I think the very first thing is the improved stakeholder relationship. Okay, so it's that trust and confidence, again, that you can mine what you said you're going to mine. But of course, you can also be looking for enhanced operational efficiencies. So maybe some of those comparisons weren't showing great variance between, say, a measure and an estimate. And so if you can make changes to make improvements or reduce that variance over time, then obviously we've got opportunities there in the operation side of things. But with that becomes a reduced risk as well. So a reduced risk in not being able to mine what you said was going to be available, and also having an understanding of what's sitting on those stockpiles. Again, we've talked in previous podcasts about the size of some of these stockpiles that we see on mines. Having a handle on those actual stockpiles is really important. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is increase the profitability of the mine, of the company, so that we attract more investment. Okay, so that's where the shareholders are happy and they'll give you more money. But by demonstrating that commitment to responsible and sustainable mining practices, that will attract further investment into the company. But Ian, I just wanted to ask you, I wanted to flip that question and ask what you see would be the potential risks associated with, say, poor data transparency and inaccurate reconciliation in the mining industry. And I know that you've seen it, I've seen it, but what do you consider the risks?
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of them, and you've touched on some of them. But from my point of view, I think people have reconciliation, but if they're not transparent or they don't know what they're doing, they're not necessarily interpreting it correctly. So they don't really know what they're measuring. They don't really know what it means, and they don't really know how well they're doing or how badly they're doing. And more importantly, as you said a few times, the shareholders or the stakeholders don't really know how badly they're doing. And of course, as you mentioned, that leads to a huge loss of trust by the shareholders or the stakeholders. And in some cases, it can lead to financial penalties. We've seen a number of reasonably large Australian companies go down the tubes in recent years, and arguably some of that was attributable to poor reconciliation and not really knowing what they were going to mine. Yeah. So literally the survival of the company in some cases is at stake. And as you mentioned, there's inefficiencies, there's increased costs, and when you do have a problem, at a very fundamental level, the mill's giving you X and you're saying we're generating Y. Is that difference because you're not doing it right? Is it a reconciliation issue? Or is there no issue at all? So you don't really know what the problem is. So I think, we could talk for hours about this, but I think from my point of view, that's some of the issues of this idea of a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about this idea of mapping or doing a visual representation of the mine value chain? Do you think that's important?
I honestly think it's a step one. Like before you do anything, and we do it in consulting. As soon as we start talking to clients, we basically ask the questions and we're mapping their material movement flow on their mine value chain as we're talking to them. And we're then presenting it to them to say, have we captured it right? Because a picture tells 1,000 words. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I've been to many mines as you have, and sometimes the first thing I do is to try and work out what's happening, picture the mine value chain. And I'm always amazed when they don't have a picture to show me, or they don't have a flow chart or a sequence. We do this, we do that, but they don't really know what's happening. So I absolutely agree with you that having a clear picture of the nodes, the stockpiles, the measurement points, what's being measured is critical.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of data transparency. It's actually being able to show somebody quite quickly what you've got on your mind, where the data's coming from, where is it going to, and again, that's going to build. If we go to a site and that's already there, immediately we've got confidence that these guys know what they're doing. It doesn't take much to get a mind value chain material movement flow together, especially when you know your own data.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, that's a good way to end, and a good place to end our chat. Thanks, Rayleen, for your views.
Thanks, Ian.
If you'd like to listen to more of our Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro podcast, you'll find them for free on our website, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and most of the podcast platforms. Thank you.